Disaster Recovery Institute International.
DRI International.
DRI.
Disaster Recovery Institute International.
Good morning. I'm Al Berman, Chairman of the Board of DRI International and President of the DRI Foundation. When we formed the DRI Foundation in 2011, its mission was to provide a means for members of the resilience profession to support local communities that were impacted by disasters. Our first few years saw us support everything from Hurricane Sandy relief, where we partnered with Delta Airlines and Long Island-based fire stations to provide blankets to residents, to helping Hurricane Harvey victims, where we worked through a local church to provide aid to those who had lost their homes. We donated to support firefighters who fought the endless blazes in Los Angeles. Our global efforts helped earthquake victims in Nepal, Mexico, and Haiti. Most recently, we turned our efforts to helping medical facilities and food banks with over $50,000 in donations to help the fight against COVID-19. But we wanted to do more, and the foundation expanded its efforts to doing volunteer work in locations that hosted our annual conference. Mayors of both Nashville and Las Vegas twice proclaimed DRI Foundation Day for our work in their communities. From there, we set up 2 annual scholarships to help certified professionals pay for higher education for their family members. We founded Women in Business Continuity Management to provide a much-needed forum for women professionals seeking to reach out to their peers. We created a scholarship program for those women who wanted to enter the profession but did not have the financial means to do so. The program continues to grow with more than 500 members, which have added a mentorship program and a dedicated women's track at our annual conference. 4 years ago, we created a Veterans Outreach Program as a way to repay the sacrifices made by military personnel who have given unselfishly of themselves to protect our nation. In seeking a means to give back, we concluded that helping veterans with the challenges of transitioning from a military life to a civilian one would ease the anxiety and uncertainty that many veterans face. We were acutely aware of the lack of employment, creating a vast homeless situation for many veterans. We have helped more than 500 veterans to date, providing education, certification, and employment placement help at absolutely no cost to them. To create and implement a program like this takes an extraordinary coordination among the many non-paid volunteers who support the Veterans Outreach Program, but also from those who supply the resources necessary to enlist, supply, and provide access for veterans who enter this program. For this, we have created the Military Transition Support Award to recognize these efforts. Here to present the first Military Transition Support Award is one of the founders and guiding lights of the Veterans Outreach Program, Colonel Alan Lake, U.S. Air Force retired. Alan?
Thank you very much. Sorry about that, technical difficulties here on my end. Well, I appreciate your help, and this has been a great effort by a lot of folks, including our current co-chairs, Chris Bigham and Catherine Cooper. And I'd also like to thank Larry Chase, who worked with me early on to set this program up. And it wasn't just me, it was all teamwork. But when we started this program, we knew we were going to need help getting the word out. So we started reaching out to military influencers. These are colleges, state veterans commissions, and military combatant commands. And some of these influencers were amazing in helping the Veterans Outreach Program, okay? We created this program last year with the approval of the foundation to find those entities that are really making a difference in the world. And in the world that we live in, by helping veterans, as well as how they tie into us in the Veterans Outreach Program and the DRI Foundation. The recipient of the first award for colleges goes to St. Philip's College in San Antonio. They agreed to allow DRI to host military BCLE 2000 classes at their superb facility they called Good Samaritan Veterans Outreach and Transition Center. The teamwork and support has been phenomenal. They have provided 25% of all targeted base level DRI Foundation hosted military classes. Also, San Antonio is the home to the largest joint base in DoD history, encompassing 3 massive bases and a Wounded Warriors hospital. So it was important that we reached out to them for sure, especially for the Wounded Warrior piece. The DRI scholarship recipient numbers going through the center were used to influence military around the world. What this scholarship would help them, and that the scholarship would help them too. Sorry about that. To date, that ripple effect is felt around the world. Okay, the unified combatant commands like Special Operations Command, Central Command, Air Force Space Command, U.S. Space Command, Headquarters Air National Guard Bureau, NATO, all have heard of our great successes and they've seen the numbers. And those numbers are generated mainly by one entity, and that's St. Philip's College. Even people in the United Kingdom, Germany, Belgium, Italy, and Romania are military assigned there. They had heard about the course and they all wanted to take the course themselves, right? Get the scholarship, compete for it. From Navy SEALs to Green Berets to pilots to general officers, they all want a scholarship, and they knew that what St. Philip's did led the way for all that to happen. Now, there's another impressive reason for them receiving this award. During the early days of COVID-19, before wearing masks, before CDC guidelines, before it came over here, before Zoom or GoToMeeting was a thing, before anything else, the college began to shut down their classes and buildings in an abundance of caution, with only one building left open and one course left to be taught, okay? And that was the Business Continuity Professional course, BCLE 2000. You see, they saw the need that America would have for graduates going through this program and helping the U.S. and the economy during this unusual, unprecedented time. They put themselves last. They weren't making any money on this, and they had to keep one building open to teach the course. So we showed up, we taught the course for just 2 days, and then in abundance of caution there, went and taught the remaining 2 days remotely. So their actions in times of peace, fantastic. In times of pandemic, even more impressive. So we thought they were perfect for this award. So with us today, representing St. Philip's College and representing Dr. Lawson, the president of the college, is Bill Mosley, Director, Good Samaritan Veterans Outreach and Transition Center. Bill, St. Philip's College, you guys rock. And the foundation would like to present you and your college this award. Please, would you display this award as a testament to what the epitome of professionalism and program excellence is when it comes to helping veterans. By the way, you beat out Headquarters Special Operations Command as a finalist, okay? Congratulations, and thank you for putting our military and veterans first. Bill?
Thank you. Alan, thank you very much for this award. And like Alan said, I'm Bill Mosley. I'm the director of the Good Samaritan Veterans Outreach and Transition Center here at St. Philip's College. And on behalf of Dr. Lawson, the president of the college, and Dr. Mordecai Brownlee, the vice president of student success, my immediate boss, I'm accepting this award, and I'm also accepting it representing my outstanding staff, and Mr. Anthony Camacho and Ms. Patty Cacase. Just very quickly, a little bit about the Good Samaritan Veterans Outreach and Transition Center. We officially opened in August of 2017. This is a joint venture from the City of San Antonio and St. Philip's College. City of San Antonio partnered with St. Philip's College to provide this transition center to all veterans and family members, and every service we provide is at no cost. We provide financial counseling, employment assistance, workshops like DRIs, emergency housing services, legal services, mental services, etc. The key is at no cost. When Alan contacted me several years ago and said, hey, I want to come and provide this class to transitioning service members, we had a long discussion. He assured me it was at no cost and it was for veterans, transitioning service members. I was delighted to host him. We've hosted Alan. He has actually utilized the facility 7 times in our classroom, and over 155 personnel, students, veterans, if you will, have graduated from his course. The last time he was down there, our chancellor of all 5 colleges happened to be taking a tour and was wildly impressed with what Alan was doing and DRI's focus for our veterans and family members. Since August of 2017, over 20,000 veterans and family members have come through our facility. It's a 15,000 square foot facility and received no cost service. Just last year, over 8,000 service members and veterans utilized our service. We're a unique college. We are off the college's main campus, so it's easily accessible to every community member within San Antonio. Our college is a historically Black college and university and a Hispanic serving institution that was started in 1898, and they offer over 30 degrees and certificates within our college. I just want to say it's an honor to be receiving this award, but more importantly, it's an honor to stand with all these great folks that volunteer their services to transitioning service members, and not to mention the other awardees. I'm in super great company. Hey, we're humbled and honored to receive this, and we enjoy getting up each and every day and providing this service. There are over 10 veteran service organizations that operate within our facility at no cost, the Texas Veteran Commission, the VA, and many others. On behalf of all the folks I mentioned, thank you very much for this service. And more importantly, DRI, thank you for what you're doing all across the world, literally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you for all you've done for veterans and what the college has done with you and your team. We greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure the veterans do too. Alan, thank you for your great service. That ends the presentation for the DRI Foundation. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great day.
Hello, and welcome to our DRI Summit Day 2 keynote. I'm Jeff Holland, DRI's Communications and Social Media Manager, here to introduce Lolita Jackson, Climate Policy and Programs Advisor for the New York City Mayor's Office, who is here to tell us about the lessons she's learned. From 9/11 to Hurricane Sandy to the current pandemic, Jackson has been at the center of New York City's response. Working in the NYC mayor's office, she is the city diplomat for climate change and is primary liaison to foreign and domestic governments. Jackson also administers activities for New York City's participation in global climate and resilience networks such as C40 cities, as well as the United Nations. She is also part of the team responsible for One NYC, NYC's overall strategic plan. In addition, she is a visiting fellow of Penn Perry World House, Penn's global think tank for 2021, and is a 1989 alumna of the Penn School of Engineering. Lolita, thanks for being here to share your experiences.
I am a survivor of 2 terrorist attacks. I worked for Morgan Stanley in 2 World Trade Center, which most people know as the South Tower, from 1992 until 9/11. And I was in the building working on the 70th and 72nd floors during the bombing in 1993 and on 9/11. In 1993, I was sitting at my desk eating lunch on the 72nd floor when I heard the loud boom all the way in the basement. Soon after that, our floor began filling with smoke, and we began our slow descent down the pitch black stairways. About 10 minutes later, 50,000 people going down 6 sets of stairwells, 2 by 2. You could not see your hand in front of your face. There were no announcements explaining what was happening. We left on our own accord without being told to leave. And there was smoke in the stairwells. It took us hours to get out that day. And we walked outside into a snowstorm. There was a classroom full of kindergarten children who were on the observation deck at the time. And some of them had to be helicoptered off the roof. It was very chaotic getting out of the buildings, and it was quite scary. Most people don't realize it was actually scarier for some of us to go out in 1993 than it was in 9/11 due to this uncertainty. During my talk today, I'd like to walk you through how the lessons learned from that incident on February 26th, 1993, how it shaped my company's response to 9/11 and other challenges, while also being foundational for me when I took subsequent roles in the New York City mayor's office, where I've been on the ground for Hurricanes Irene and Sandy, as well as the current COVID-19 crisis. My company, Morgan Stanley, at the time, was the largest tenant of the World Trade Center, and 2,500 people were displaced in 1993. Many lessons were learned from what took place that day, and changes were made. Our chief of security, Rick Verscorla, who died on 9/11 saving us, worked with the Port Authority in 1993, who ran the buildings, to ensure substantive changes were made. Emergency lighting and reflective glow-in-the-dark paint were added to the stairwells, which was crucial during our escape on 9/11, as the stairwells remained lit and clear below impact. Our company held regular mandatory fire drills, where senior employees such as vice presidents and above were fire marshals, so that when you were told to leave for the fire drill, you actually hung up the phone and left. There were both male and female fire wardens, so they could check each bathroom and interior offices that had no windows. Each floor of the World Trade Center was a full acre. That's very large. So multiple people were needed for each floor to do those tasks. The company also kept 500 reserve desks fully operational in Jersey City, where computers and phones were always in working order in anticipation of another major evacuation event. Finally, the company set up an 800 number where you would call in and have yourself marked safe during another evacuation once you reach safety. I would now like to share my 9/11 story to illustrate how these learnings from 1993 and the changes that were made came into play in action. So we had a staff meeting every Tuesday morning at 8:30. And there are some people who even flew in for this meeting once a month. So we actually had people who didn't work in the buildings day to day visiting with us that day. I was looking out the window at the other North Tower directly at the time, because I was next to speak in the meeting, and I'm not a morning person. So I was staring out the window, and you probably heard the stories that it was a very clear, beautiful blue day. And I was on the 70th floor. And I have you looking out of the window when the North Tower was hit by the plane. The way the buildings were situated is that I was looking out of this window and the plane came here, so I could not see the plane approach the building or hit it, but I saw the aftermath. I saw the flames shoot out, the papers go down, and we knew we weren't getting any work that day. So my boss basically said, time to go. And we got up and started leaving. And because we had been drilled so thoroughly about how to evacuate the buildings, people filled up cups with water and ice, got paper towels because we didn't know if we're going to be walking into smoke. In 1993, a lot of people had left their wallets and their coats behind. Were never able to get them back in time because the workers, unfortunately, were repairing the building. Some of your things were missing when you came back. So as long as you were passing your office on the way to the stairwells, you went back to get those items. We then gathered and they went to all the bathrooms and all the interior offices to make sure everybody was accounted for. We started going down the stairs. Now, you may have heard stories where the Port Authority was coming on and telling workers to stay put because our building had not been hit. Our security officer had predicted that the buildings could potentially be hit by planes. He's on record saying this. There's a book that's written about him. His name is Rick Rescorla. I suggest you look that up if you want more information. So he had planned for evacuation specifically for the Morgan Stanley people only. So he came on the actual loudspeaker and told us to leave, even though other people were being told to stay. The Morgan Stanley employees were being told to leave, to gather to the 44th floor, which there was 2 sky lobbies in the buildings. You may remember, or you may have heard, there's one on 78 and one on 44. The one on 78, only 6 people lived because the plane went through that floor when my building got hit. So we were told to take elevators from our floor to the sky lobby on the 44th floor. So we left the stairwells. I remember exiting at 59. I was going down the stairs with a colleague of mine, and he decided he wanted to go to an empty office to call his wife, which he did. She unfortunately didn't answer the phone, but he did go to do that. And so I took that elevator to 44th floor. And you may remember that it was a Tuesday right after the Labor Day holiday week that many people had taken. So many of us had not seen one another in quite some time. And also some people were not there who was supposed to be at work because it was the night before was an overtime New York Giants game. And so many people stayed up late to watch the game, and we were going to come into work a little bit later than 9. It was also the New York primary for elections. And so actually a lot of people were going to vote. And finally, it was also the first day of school. So the reason that the president, or the head of the CEO, of Cantor Fitzgerald lived and his entire rest of his company died is he was taking his child to the first day of kindergarten. And he was doing that. So there were a lot of things that came into play as to whether you were at work or not. But more importantly, we did listen to Rick Rescorla, as I said, and came to the 44th floor. And that's when we got hit by the plane. That floor has no windows. The sky lobbies didn't have windows. So we did not see the jet fuel going down the sides of the buildings. But we did feel the building obviously be hit. In addition, the interesting thing is that it didn't shake. It just moved like this. And because the buildings, the way they were constructed, the higher floor you are, the more the building moved. It moved even in storms. You could see doors open and close in bathrooms. And so you really felt like the building was falling over. That's the sensation that you got. So because we could not see what was happening, and we didn't know what had happened to the other building, we were not told it got hit by a jumbo airplane. We were evacuating, not screaming. We just actually went down the stairs with a sense of urgency. I'm not going to say we weren't urgent about it, but there weren't people running around. We literally got ourselves together. And for me, I was trained as an engineer. I was like, okay, I just got to figure out the safest way to get out because I don't know what's going on, but I have to get out quickly because I remembered how long it took to get out of the buildings in 1993. And I felt that whatever had happened, I wouldn't have that kind of time. So I went to the stairwell that had the least amount of people that were going toward it, closest to where the building had actually gotten hit. And I opened it up, and because of the changes that they had made in 1993, or after 1993, stairwell was lit. The reflective paint worked. There was nothing wrong with them because the building had gotten hit so much higher. There was nothing wrong down there. And so I was able to go down the stairs. I went down the 44 flights of stairs at that point in about 10 minutes. Which it feels, I guess now, if I looked at it now, I couldn't do that because it's 20 years later and my knees are a little bit more creaky. But, we were making a brisk pace, and I was trying to even make jokes. Once we got to the 15th floor, I said, pretend it's a workout that you're doing on the Stairmaster, which was popular back then. So we're counting down the floors, 15, 14, and just really trying to keep everybody motivated to keep going. As I said, I made it out in that amount of time. And I walked out of, there was a Borders bookstore in the northeast corner of the complex. And when I got out of that exit, they said, don't turn around, don't look up, don't use your cell phone, just keep walking. So walked about 3 blocks away on Fulton Street, which basically faces actually the World Trade Center complex. And it was like seeing the Tower of Inferno. The buildings were on fire. I wasn't with anyone I knew, and I'm standing in the middle of the street, and silly me, I'm thinking, wow, it's going to take us a long time to go back to work. I'm thinking I'm still going to get back to work. And a friend of mine who worked in the buildings as a contractor, but was not an actual employee, so he was not in the buildings at the time, somehow saw me in the street in the middle of the thousands of people and said, hey, do you know what happened? And I said, no, I have no idea what happened. He said, well, the buildings were hit by planes. And so he explained to me what happened, and I'm standing there in shock. He said, you should go home now. So what do you mean go home? He said, well, you live in Manhattan, you can actually get home. These people, a lot of them, they can't get home. And so I got on the last subway train that ran out of that station that day at Fulton Street. And it was about 8 minutes to 10. And my building fell at 1 minute to 10, 9:59. So had my friend not seen me, I would have been standing there running from the dust cloud. So I got home and was able to call into that 800 number so they knew that I was safe. But unfortunately, my friend who I just spoke about, he didn't make it out because when he went to call his wife, that delayed him by 3.5 or 4 minutes. Now it's just long enough for him to come back to try to take the elevator to the same place that I already had been. And he was in the elevator by himself when the cable snapped and he died. So it was really, really terrible and devastating, as you can imagine, because I was the last person who was close to him, who was with him when that happened. And I would have actually died with him had I decided that I wasn't going to stop and I was going to keep going. So really was happenstance. So as I said, I made it home and called that 800 number. And then after that, there were certain people that I worked with who were asked to go right back to the office that was in Jersey City to help shore up the operations of the company at the time. The problem is you could still see the smoldering ruins across the river. So one of the lessons that I want people to take away from this is have your backup site not near the original site, because goodness forbid, if it's a terrorist attack or something that actually damages your original site, you don't want people having to look at it, at where the devastation came, because there were people who actually couldn't go back to work because there was no place to put them because they refused to go and be able to see the burning ruins of the towers, which makes sense now, but at the time, no one had thought of that. So I wanted to give you that lesson. One thing they did well was they paid for all workers to take whatever transportation was most comfortable for you. There were some people who, and I was one of them, who didn't feel comfortable taking the subway because that was something where it was so public that everyone's going to be talking about the Trade Center. And at the time, you may remember, no one was really talking to survivors. They were talking about the people who had died, which of course is appropriate, but people had forgotten that 18,000 people had walked out. And so there were some insensitive things that may have been said. And so I wanted to take a ferry to work because the ferry has less people and people are usually very quiet on a ferry compared to the subway. And so I was able to take 2 ferries to work. So being flexible about how your workers deal with whatever this trauma may be. And then, you know, just in general, it really took a while for our company to get itself back together, to heal from that. And the mental health things that were going on with that took a lot longer than people expected. And there was much more needed with that. So while the loss of life on 9/11 was devastating, there would have been a much greater loss of life if we had not learned from the experiences of 1993. Morgan Stanley had 1,500 people in the buildings the morning of 9/11, but we only had 13 deaths. Even one death is too many, but hundreds more would have died had we not become more resilient after 1993, as you just heard in my story. All of these changes came to bear during and immediately after 9/11. The one thing I would say that could have been done a bit better is to keep in mind the mental health of people who work for you, as I said, if they have suffered a trauma at work. There are people who had to run for their lives, and others who were not in the building insisted on them getting back to work to show the firm would not be slowed down by the attack. And those who were not there really didn't understand the trauma of what people went through and saw. Some people suffered terribly through this. And to me, the lesson is that your company is only as resilient as the people are able to stand. Continuing business without looking out for your people is a losing strategy. 2 years later, the 2003 blackout happened. Many of us assumed it was another attack, and our auto response kicked in. The evacuation of all Morgan Stanley buildings throughout New York City was totally seamless because people knew not to hesitate, and it was run very smoothly. The lesson learned from that incident was that every employee at VP level and above was asked to keep a landline phone that did not depend on electricity, so that you didn't have to worry about a dead cell phone battery. To this day, I have a dormant landline due to this. Many of us changed our lives after 9/11. After going through this twice, I decided that if I could get killed at work, I'd better really love my job. So I left. I quit Morgan Stanley in late 2003, a few months after the blackout, and went on a 2-year odyssey that landed me in the New York City mayor's office in January 2006. My first job was as Manhattan Director of Community Affairs, which called upon my personal experience with disaster and had me responding to the Queens blackout of 2006, the Manhattan crane collapses, there were several, the Sully plane landing in the Hudson River, and more. Most important to this talk, I also responded to Hurricane Sandy. 44 New Yorkers died and $19 billion of economic impact resulted from the 14-foot tidal surge on October 29, 2012. You may recall that due to a power station fire in Manhattan, almost all of Manhattan below 30th Street was without power for several days, and the New York Stock Exchange had to close for 2 days. But one of the only entities that retained power was Goldman Sachs, whose headquarters is basically on the Hudson River in Lower Manhattan. Why is that? Well, when Hurricane Irene hit in 2011, Goldman Sachs did an after action for their own company and realized they were not appropriately prepared if a major storm did actually hit. You may recall that there was almost no damage in New York City during Hurricane Irene. A lot of it was upstate New York and in other states. So Goldman Sachs put together a fully developed action plan. They surrounded their property with 12 feet of sandbags, so they didn't flood at all. And they also had full generator power. So if you look at a map of what happened during that day, the night of the storm, you'll notice that there's lights on in one little part of Lower Manhattan. That's Goldman Sachs. Only a few blocks away, the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel was filled end to end with water, yet they were fine because they were prepared. As you can imagine, there was substantial after action done after Hurricane Sandy by New York City. And one of the main things I want to impart that is relevant to this audience is the importance of continuity planning. I'm proud to say that I was the very first person in the mayor's office who advocated for a COOP plan formation that surveyed all employees for their skills and what they bring to the table. This came from me being placed at a medical shelter the day after Hurricane Sandy and someone going into diabetic shock. I had no idea how to help them and should not have been placed in that situation. They were placing bodies by proximity to location rather than expertise. We developed an employee survey after that asked about medical training, whether you have a driver's license or not, if you could lift 40 pounds if necessary, language is spoken, if you're more interested in helping with management and deployment or being on the ground, and more. After Hurricane Sandy, people are now placed in roles targeted to their strengths, making overall operations much more smooth. Another big Sandy lesson learned is to incorporate regular breaks, to not have people working 7 days a week for weeks on end. It's harmful to mental health, particularly if you're a second responder, a person who's normally in management but assigned to a front level role and are not trained or prepared to handle it. This is the equivalent of your company going through a crisis and then putting everyone on the phone for customer service. As you know, not everyone should be on the phone. And discernment and proper training are very important here. New York City had gone through much through my 15 years in the mayor's office, but I would have to say that the current COVID challenge is the biggest yet. I would now like to discuss how New York City has dealt with the challenges that we face. New York City is a city of 8.6 million people with 520 miles of coastline. Only the Bronx is tied to the mainland. The other 4 boroughs are on islands, with 40% of its citizens born in another country, 25% with limited English proficiency, and 45% at or near poverty as of 2015. With the level of diversity in our city, racial, socioeconomic, and more, the policies necessary to address disparities are critical. In the short term, like cities everywhere, we've been rocked by the damage caused by COVID-19. 30,000 New York City residents died. Let me repeat that. 30,000 people just in New York City alone have died from COVID-19. At one point, 800 people died in one day. Many of those who died were people of color who either lived in densely populated homes, were on the front lines as workers who could not work from home, or had comorbidities. This exposed the already existing gaps in healthcare access and density of living space. In addition, the lockdowns have decimated many industries. 400,000 jobs lost in hospitality and entertainment, 100,000 jobs on Broadway alone. 66 million tourists in 2019 dropped by about 66% to 22.9 million for the year 2020. and commercial real estate taxes fell off a cliff, projected to decline by $2.5 billion next year, as property values have rapidly fallen and only 10% of office workers ever went back to work since March 2020. In addition, New York City has never reopened its restaurants above 25% occupancy indoors, and bars and performance venues were never reopened at all. We're projected to have $9 billion less than anticipated over the course of the next 2 years. So how do we tackle these colossal issues? One of the first things recognized was that we needed to help shore up small businesses. Of the more than 200,000 businesses located in New York City, 98% have fewer than 100 employees. These small businesses employ more than half of New York City's private sector workforce and often provide a first chance for economic self-determination and a path to the middle class for their owners. Our Department of Small Business Services launched 3 new mentorship programs, providing industry experts as guides for those seeking to start and grow a business in the post-COVID era. These programs are expected to serve 1,500 small businesses this year. We launched a program for restaurants to expand their outdoor seating options in order to stay open, as this has proven very popular and will now be a permanent fixture in New York City. In a partnership with MasterCard called All in NYC, consumers receive $10 back after spending $20 on experience or $25 back after spending $100 on a hotel reservation. This is to encourage in-town and domestic travelers to take advantage of low hotel occupancy and prices. There's also a recovery coalition planning how to safely re-engage tourism in New York City once we're past this phase. Some of these innovative changes accelerated items that were already being touted by advocates and other groups, and we might all reflect on how to make some of them permanent in all of our cities. As I stated earlier, our popular Open Restaurants program will be made permanent, and restaurants will be permitted to use heating and enclosures, which were illegal prior, and expand seating to adjacent properties with neighbors' consent. There's so much more I would love the opportunity to share about our work in New York City. I hope this brief talk has given you a sense of the lessons learned from the shocks that have taken place in New York City and all that we are doing to ensure that all New York residents are able to participate, thrive, and prosper in the future of our city safely. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Orloff. I've worked with the DRI team to develop the Business Continuity Exercise Program. I'm also the lead facilitator, so I hope to see you all soon. In the program, we discuss proven methodologies that you can apply in developing your exercise and evaluation training program. We use the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, the Incident Command System, and SMART methodologies. We go through the fundamentals, establishing the program, design and development of your exercise program, conducting your exercise, and the all-important evaluation. By exercising your business continuity plan, you're testing and making sure that your businesses can be safe and that your people in your team stay safe. You're promoting teamwork, and you're also developing team capacity and team capability. Lastly, you're allowing for your teams to come together and to build resilience, especially in these COVID-19 times when people are in front of the computer, they're focusing on getting their business done. You can create a fun and interactive testing program, an evaluation program that brings people together to practice their skills, but to also have fun. In my experience, there's no environment that comes as close as possible to disaster response than a fully functional exercise. It's an environment where you can apply a certain amount of pressure and tension and see how people respond, make adjustments, and allow them to practice in a no-fault, no-risk environment. Also, through the use of a progressive model, all levels of disaster managers and business continuity managers can choose the level of exercise and evaluation that they want to do, going from the simplest of tabletop exercises to a fully functional exercise where you can bring teams together, say BCM and cyber together, so that they understand where their plans intersect and how they work together, and bring team members that don't often work together to really practice and see where their gaps are and how they fluidly work together. So I hope that you will be joining us for the Business Continuity Exercise and Evaluation Training Program. Hope to see you soon.
Welcome to Day 2 of the DRI International Annual Awards of Excellence, recognizing the best and brightest in the resilience community. I'm Russell Wooldridge, and I'm joined again by co-host Ramon Pinera of BlackBerry Ad Hoc, the exclusive sponsor for our virtual summit. Our first award today is the DRI International Honor Roll Award, which recognizes a certified professional who has demonstrated exceptional service to DRI International, made a significant and lasting impact to the field of business continuity, and has earned the respect and admiration of their professional colleagues. The award recipient is selected by the DRI International Board of Directors, and this year's deserving recipient is Dean Gallup, who has done a remarkable job as the DRI International Glossary Committee Chairman. In addition to his work with DRI, Dean is an MBCP and Director of Cybersecurity and Business Resilience Consulting, Advantage Solutions Incorporated. Thank you, Dean.
Our next award is for Nonprofit Sector Program Leader of the Year, recognizing nonprofit professionals engaged in continuity management and community engagement. This year's finalists are Tulipi Fidel, National President, NCYSD NGO. Ephraim Wilgus, Technical Director of Disaster Recovery, Crisis Management and Pandemic, Columbia University Information Technology.
And the winner is Ephraim Wilgus, Columbia University Information Technology. We now recognize the Program Leader of the Year for the public sector. These finalists have enhanced innovation within their COOP programs and have improved preparedness by championing business continuity to local businesses.
The finalists are Dinesh Elangovan, Secretary, Chennai Chapter, Overseas Security Advisory Council, Chennai Chapter. Lyle McFadden, CBCP, Senior Solutions Architect, United Nations International Computing Center.
And the winner is Dinesh Elangovan, Overseas Security Advisory Council, Chennai Chapter.
Our final award today is for Program Leader of the Year in the private sector. and it honors the business continuity professionals who demonstrate exceptional achievement, innovation, and leadership. The finalists are Avashay Ben Barak, CBCP Global Business Continuity Manager, Amdocs. Holly McKenroy, CBCP Manager, Business Continuity and Emergency Response, BGIS Global Integrated Solutions. Leah Sawyer, MBCP Business Continuity Manager, Staples, Inc.
And the winner is Avashay Ben Barak, Amdocs.
Hello and welcome. My name is Lyndon Bird. I'm the chairman of the DRI Future Vision Committee, and this session is designed to present and discuss the most recent publications issued by the DRI Future Vision Committee. I guess over the years I've spoken to many of you face to face at conference or maybe in other events in the US or around the world. When I left last year from our conference in Savannah, I was really looking forward to going to Seattle this year. However, events have rapidly changed, and clearly we now have to do things in an entirely different way. As we said in the recent DRI predictions report, 2020 was a year no one predicted and no one is ever likely to forget. So before I say anything further, I'd just like to say that in my opinion, there are very few benefits to be gained by not having face-to-face conferences. But there is one, and that is the ability for us to get together a range of speakers, which perhaps would be quite difficult to manage to get together to come to one particular location at the end of February, beginning of March, as we usually have to do for conference. So this particularly is the case in the Future Visions Committee, for the simple reason that our committee is very international. It's not normally possible to get so many different people together at a single venue. So it's good that we've been able to get together on this event today, a good cross-section of our committee. They're going to tell us how they think about the world, how they think we're going to move on after COVID-19. They're going to tell us that globally, and they're going to give us some insight about their particular regions. On the program today, we have speakers from the UK, from the US, from the European Union, from Australia, from Japan. They're all well known in various aspects of resilience, with specializations in security, technology, emergency management, academic research, and risk insight. We have a UK citizen who lives in Italy. We have a citizen of the Philippines who lives in the UK. We have a professor, we have several published authors, and we have government advisors. A real cross-section of global expertise in the field of resilience. Before they start, however, I'd like to tell you about two of the key outputs from the Future Vision Committee. These are our two annual reports. The first one, published in early December each year, is called the Trends Report. And about a month later, in early January, we follow that with the annual Predictions Report. These reports have been produced now for the last 6 years and provide some excellent information, fascinating thoughts and opinions and views on what is going on both around the world and also in our resilience profession itself. If you've not actually seen any of these reports before, I really encourage you to have a look at them. They are full of data, information, thoughts of professionals around the world, and I learn a lot from helping compile them. So I suggest that you perhaps do download them, check them out, at least the more recent ones. This year, of course, in either of our reports, we couldn't write much about it without referring constantly to COVID-19. Therefore, in the trends report, as well as our normal output, we decided to include a survey about how well we feel our industry has responded to the challenge of COVID-19 and the likely long-term business changes we may have to incorporate into our future plans and our future resilience programs. 2 years ago, when we were in Vegas, if a conference speaker had come along with a case study or a presentation indicating a global pandemic, which even had perhaps a tenth of the impact of COVID-19, I suspect they'd have been seen as a little bit unrealistic. And perhaps a few people might have thought they were a bit crazy. Yet that's what actually happened. So I hope I never again have to hear someone tell me, as I've heard many times in the past, oh, we don't need to worry about that particular risk. That could never happen. And even if it could happen, it never will happen. And if it did happen, it won't be that important. I think we don't want to hear those stories again, because clearly COVID-19 has demonstrated to us the fact that if anything could happen, it will eventually, and we need to be ready for it. I'll be back later in the session to provide you with some more highlights of the reports and perhaps also discuss a little bit about how we see the future post-COVID. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker. This is Andrea Bonin Blanc. Andrea is a true visionary who shares her extensive research and study through the book she publishes and many other publications. She influences opinion formers, business leaders, academic experts in many countries, across many sectors. And perhaps you can tell us a little about how you see the post-COVID world. Will the global crisis lead to better international cooperation or a more nationalistic and protectionist mindset? What are the global political changes we can expect? And will these lead to a more internationally coordinated resilience approach? Andrea.
Greetings, and thank you very much for that great introduction, Lyndon. I'm delighted to be here to share some thoughts about 2021 and beyond. One of the things that I like to think about when I'm thinking about future trends is not just thinking about the next quarter or the next year, but thinking about the mega trends. And I've written about it and talked about it before. And I think for this year, 2021 is such an unusual year, because 2020 was so unusual, but also because 2020 really helped to reveal a lot of things that were already there. So based on your question, Lyndon, what does the post-COVID world look like from mostly a political standpoint? Are we going to have more international cooperation or less? I think I have good news and I have mediocre or challenging news. And what I would start with is the good news. I think we are going to have more international cooperation going forward for a little time, at least. And I think there's another piece to that puzzle in terms of international cooperation, which is that we live in a time of existential systemic threats that threaten the entire globe. And so I think for that very reason, we're going to see a continuation of the really great cooperation, for example, that we saw not necessarily amongst nations, but amongst scientists from many different places who accomplished something completely, never seen before in this world, getting not one, not two, but several vaccines done at the speed of light. So I think that's the good news part of the near future. Then I see another major theme geopolitically. It's no longer communism versus capitalism or, the Cold War as we knew it way back. It's democracy versus autocracy. The world blocs are going to be changing into those that do not believe in constitutional rights and freedoms and those who do. Very, very related is a third trend, a geopolitical trend, which also suffuses our daily lives, which is this trust versus suspicion, real versus fake, information versus misinformation. And so to me, that's going to be a very fraught piece of the puzzle that responsible countries, responsible companies have to deal with from a technology standpoint. And that leads me to my fourth sort of geopolitical megatrend, but also economic, and that is the rise of stakeholder capitalism. We're seeing it everywhere. And the real question there, and I think the stakeholder piece of it gives us a clue, is whether we're going to continue with the sort of unbridled capitalism that we've seen, certainly in the United States, but in several of the European countries as well, or are we going to go into a new phase of smartly regulated capitalism, where the government is actually involved in protecting stakeholders against some of the worst things that are happening out there in the world? Pandemics, for example, climate issues, for example, social justice issues, for example, the restoration of democracy. So I think those four trends from a geopolitical standpoint will be occurring over the next couple of years, and we need to sort of focus our energies on doing a constructive, empathetic job. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much for your attention. Look forward to hearing thoughts and feedback, and wish you the very best for 2021.
Thank you, Andrea, for your challenging and thought-provoking ideas. Our next speaker is Richard Knowlton, my go-to person for strategic thinking on all aspects of information operational security. Richard is an international expert on cyber risk and cyber terrorism and how they link into the overall resilience agenda. Richard, do you think that business has been as vigilant as they should have been during the COVID crisis? What would you see as the main security risks facing the Western democracies over the next few years?
Thanks, Lyndon. I'm assuming that you're thinking about working from home. I don't particularly trust any of the statistics, but it's clear that cyber attacks have increased by many multiples over the last year. Obviously, it's difficult to generalize, but I can certainly see an overriding theme. During the crisis, we've all got used to hearing about smart working, but most people don't understand that smart working has a specific meaning. It's not just another way of saying remote working or working from home. Smart working means a planned and orderly shift from the office to remote working. It's based on agreement with employees on goals, objectives, working hours, and so on. It promises greater efficiency and flexibility to employers and a better work-life balance for employees. What we saw in 2020 wasn't a move to genuine smart working at all. Governments simply ordered organizations to move to remote, that's usually home working, as an urgent emergency measure. Larger companies already had some experience of true smart working. They'd thought about the security challenges of working from home, and crucially, they'd also thought about the so-called human factor, their security culture, and the security awareness of their people. So those companies that already had a plan in which security played an important part have inevitably been more vigilant during the crisis. They've tended to manage the COVID emergency reasonably well. But, and it's a big but, most companies did not have a plan for remote working. If they'd thought about it at all, many executives probably assumed that pandemics only happen once a century, as opposed to the 3 we've actually seen in the first 20 years of this one. When COVID arrived, these executives had some serious business issues to confront, like the impacts on their business models and supply chains. On top of that, most companies simply weren't ready to meet the security challenges of the pandemic. Those challenges were always going to be significant, not just in terms of technology and processes, but also in terms of the security awareness and security culture of their staff. We've known for years that hacking techniques like phishing succeed because our people are untrained, unaware, or careless, and that they bring big rewards to criminals through extortion methods like ransomware. So it was really no surprise that there were security problems when, more or less overnight, so many companies made an unplanned, unthought through transition from a relatively secure office environment to working from home. The bad guys, as always, moved fast to exploit the extra opportunities that the crisis gifted them. So I'd say a mixed picture. And as always in resiliency, those companies that had a plan have come off best. Now, your second question is a great one, and honestly, it really needs a conference on its own. I can't do much justice to it in a few minutes, except to give some headlines about what I see as the main cyber threats. The general political, social, and economic context hasn't looked so hostile and frankly scary since at least the 1950s, and arguably even longer. Actually, that's something I've said every year for at least the last 10, but it's still true. So how do you begin to prioritize the cyber risks if you're in government? I'd start with state-sponsored hacking. It's scored remarkable successes in the Western liberal democracies. Just in the last month or so, we've been reading about the devastating SolarWinds attacks that seem to have penetrated every level of government in the US and elsewhere. I say seem to because it could be years before we really understand the impacts. And state-sponsored hacking isn't just targeting governments. It's regularly sucked huge quantities of information out of universities, think tanks, and medical research facilities, as well, of course, as the private sector. But most worrying to me at the state level is the cyber arms race. We've known for some years that malevolent states are developing and testing their capability to attack and to disable key parts of our critical national infrastructures, including in space. A major problem is that this whole area of activity is literally lawless. If the country of Utopia bombs Ruritania's power supply system, then that's an act of war in anybody's money. If Utopia cripples the power system through an unattributable cyber attack, though, what's an appropriate response for Ruritania to make? Should we be reassured that Western democracies are now developing their own cyber attack forces capable of retaliation? Haven't we been here before in the 1950s and the 1960s? My third priority for Western governments must be organized crime. It's plenty of resources, including some of the best hackers, and no need to worry about international boundaries. Best of all, the chances of being caught or disrupted are minimal, with all respect to our friends in law enforcement. We know from history and experience that organized crime is a dangerous cancer in any country, whatever form it takes. It must remain at the top of risk priority lists of any liberal democracy. Finally, one extra word about government. It must make it a priority to work closely with the private sector on cyber security. This is something that still works much better in some of our countries than in others, and it needs much more effort. And I do worry that an excessive reliance on a compliance approach leads to a false sense of security. The fact that a company has ticked off a set of boxes mandated by a regulator emphatically does not mean that the company is secure. I know that I've left a lot of important topics hanging in the air, but I hope I've given a flavor of some of the issues that I'm currently thinking about.
Thank you, Richard. Fascinating as always. We now move right across the globe to meet David Porter from Australia. David, coming from the Southern Hemisphere, you might have a slightly different perspective of global risk than some of the other panelists. For example, your country is highly prone to heat waves and flooding. So do you place climate change at the top of your worry list? And how do you feel about the increasing power of China in your region?
Thanks, Lyndon, and hi, everybody. I guess first and foremost for climate change, that's really high on our worry list. I think in recent times it's been masked with the big COVID response, which is natural, but we're still getting frequent reminders in our daily lives. For us in Australia, we're in the middle of summer at the moment, so for us that's typically very hot days, strong northerly winds, and then storms in the afternoon blowing up from the south. The temperature range for us is anywhere from 105 degrees Fahrenheit to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and sometimes that temperature variance happens in the course of an afternoon. So we do get frequent reminders of climate change. I'm no meteorologist, but for us, it feels like that the wet and dry cycle of the tropical areas of Australia that are up closer towards the equator feels like they're sort of coming down further south, down to the more populated areas around Sydney and Melbourne. For us, though, weather events and weather-driven events have had the most responses that we've had from an emergencies perspective and from a continuity perspective as well. And I guess, like, sure, IT outages and things, they're significant, but weather's scary, you know, and there's personal loss, and they're highly emotional events. And, you know, there's a big difference between not being able to access a website or do some transactions for a few days versus, you know, someone getting winched off a roof by a helicopter because they're, you know, the floodwaters are up to their roof line of their house. So absolutely, I feel the climate change and the propensity for these types of weather events to grow more severe and more widespread in nature, we're really going to need to pull our finger out and I guess improve our readiness to deal with climate change as well, and our resilience against it too. So definitely post-COVID, we expect some stronger developments in our approach to climate change in Australia from a policy perspective, but also from an infrastructure perspective. Even as recent as this morning, there was some positioning of some solar farms in the outback, which for me it's a no-brainer. That's an obvious place to start throwing in some solar farms. So I think that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of some things to come in terms of our readiness for climate change. Now, as far as China goes, I guess it's a really interesting sort of area, and the rise of the power within China. We see it very much as multifaceted. I guess they're exerting power in political and military circles, which is sort of well documented, but also trade, manufacturing, and ownership, particularly around land and infrastructure, particularly for us here in Australia. A lot of us across the world rely on China for manufacturing, and there's a lot of unknowns among products. So the components and things that sit behind products and where they're manufactured aren't necessarily always evident. So in a supplier context, you might have two different suppliers, one based in Europe and one based in Asia Pacific region, but both of those different suppliers might actually have a reliance on componentry that comes out of one place in China. And we've seen some of that with some of the computer chips and things in various products, whether they're electronic devices or even cars at the moment as well. In Australia, we've probably seen things diversify from a trade perspective. China is our biggest trading partner, but we're probably seeing that being spread across more countries at the moment, which is good. And I think we can probably see some of that diversification to come in the future as well, particularly for us within the UK, Europe, and India have been on the rise for us in terms of trading partners. But at the end of the day, I guess China operates differently to, I guess, the Western countries and other businesses that we might be familiar with. So it's a complex arrangement, it's a complex dynamic, and it really just needs a differentiated approach. So dealing with various aspects of China is not necessarily the same as dealing with local businesses. And my observation has been that sometimes we've been a bit frustrated where we've tried to operate on those terms, not understanding some of the differences about how China operates. So I think that's probably the area for us to look at there. But I think from our perspective in the Australian region, diversification is probably a big focus for us at the moment. So that's about it for me. Thanks very much.
That was really interesting, David. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now we move northwards to Japan. Our next speaker is a very old friend of mine, Professor Kenji Watanabe. Kenji, coming from Japan and living in Tokyo, you are very used to the growth and intensity of a mega city. Do you think that home working will change the way the cities function? Or do you think they'll soon revert to their old mode? Do you see differences between how your country handled COVID emergencies and how it's been handled in the US or in Europe? Finally, have you any thoughts about the particular challenges coming out of holding the Tokyo Olympics, which have been rescheduled this year?
Hello folks, my name is Kenji Watanabe from Tokyo, Japan. I'm a professor of Nagoya Institute of Technology, and my professional areas are risk management, BCM, and CIP, critical infrastructure protection. Okay, now let's move to the given two questions. First question is, do you think that home working will change the way cities function, or do you think they will soon revert to their previous model? Okay, due to the COVID-19, many people and organizations in Tokyo have started to consider moving their homes or offices out from Tokyo metropolitan area, and some of them have actually did it during or after the first and second waves of COVID-19 infections. And we experienced population decline in Tokyo area for the first time in almost 30 years. However, the rest of the people and offices remain in Tokyo after that because of the sharp rise in real estate and office rent prices in the suburbs of Tokyo with reasonable accessibility and living environment. So the commuter congestions in the morning trains are coming back, unfortunately, and the people and business in Tokyo are going back to the old normal, not new normal. They have missed the chance to change their mode of living or operation, and now passively wait for the restoring the third wave situation. Okay, now let's move to the second one. So second question is, do you see differences between how your country handled COVID-19 and the way it has been handled in Europe or the US? Not much difference from other major OECD countries. Our government agencies, private sector, medical professionals, and people are overwhelmed with responses to the moving situations COVID-19 on try and error. But interesting cases I'd like to share with you today are employee sharing. Same as other countries, Japanese airline companies have to suspend their flight services, and many of their employees have become available to do nothing. In this situation, the Japanese two major airlines, JAL, Japan Airlines, and ANA, All Nippon Airlines, have coordinated employee sharing with a major home appliance store chain and a large supermarket chain, who increased their sales with stay-home effect, and also with several municipal government offices to support handling applications and executions of the COVID-19 special financial aids for their residents and SMEs, small medium enterprises. The employees assigned for the sharing program are not laid off and keep employed with the airlines and work at the counterpart companies based on seconded contracts or dual employment contracts. The interest point is both origin companies and destination companies are trying to fill the temporary gap between labor demand and supply without losing their important human asset. So that must be one of the options for business continuity in the future or in the coming next COVID something. So those are my answers to the given the two questions. But one more thing I would like to add from my side is the Tokyo Olympic and Paralympic Games 2020. As you know, it has been postponed to this year, but it is in danger of being postponed again or cancelled due to the continuous serious situations of COVID-19, not only in Japan, but also in the participating countries. Of course, IOC and JOC, Japan Olympic Committee, are still trying to find a way to hold it, even if they have games without an audience or reduce the scale of the event. But unfortunately, as we are getting tired to dealing with COVID-19, The passion of the people to support and the motivation of the athlete to participate in Japan are now a little bit diminishing. Considering our networked society with high speed and wide area movement of people and increasing frequency of pandemics, we have to reconsider how to arrange the future incoming Olympic Paralympic Games. My current suggestion is changing it to the World Cup style with regional tournament games for each of the 5 continents. But I'd like to discuss this with you over a glass of beer, wine, or Japanese sake after the old COVID-19 waves have gone. Thank you and stay safe.
Thank you, Kenji. To round off our speakers today, I'm pleased to be joined by another long-term friend and colleague, Patrick Alcantara. Patrick is a truly international professional, originating from the Philippines with degrees from UK and Spanish universities, and a career to date that has spanned continuity, risk, research, and insight. Patrick, all economies have had severe shocks. Governments have had to borrow and spend vast amounts, unprecedented amounts, in fact, on supporting their companies and employees. Do you believe that this will lead to fundamental changes about the role of government in future? And do you think that the social media platforms help or hinder rational debate of such highly complex issues?
Thank you, Lyndon. The current pandemic is indeed a significant shock to the world economy, and it has also exposed the fundamental link between human health and productivity. Simply put, you cannot have disease ripping through society and expect the economy to grow. As we ramp up vaccination as a way out of this pandemic, governments would have to support companies and employees in the meantime to stimulate the economy and avoid long-term damage, which might stunt long-term growth. Leading nations and economies have plowed massive amounts as stimulus. For example, the US has allocated $3.9 trillion as stimulus last year, with President Biden now proposing another $1.9 trillion. As an initial stimulus package, the UK has earmarked $450 billion, which also included a furlough scheme guaranteeing 80% of income for most earners. Germany, on the other hand, has passed a $680 billion stimulus package early last year, while the European Union has recently approved a $2.2 trillion budget and stimulus plan, which will be financed by joint debt. What is interesting is the fact that many of these economies are run by center-right politicians who are in principle more wary of spending. Public spending as well has been in retreat for a generation now, with a significant exception of the Great Recession last decade, where governments worldwide bailed out the financial sector to avoid damaging the wider economy. Whether this pandemic leads to further state intervention as a norm in the future is still out there. What both events, the pandemic currently and the banking crisis last decade, do demonstrate are the conditions that justify intervention. Massive shocks that force government to act. It will ultimately depend on the electorate whether more generous state support will be the norm. But early insights suggest that there is a broad consensus in supporting citizens and the economy and doing whatever it takes to accomplish that. Of course, we will soon have to deal with paying for that stimulus, whether that means raising taxes on the wealthy or businesses or everyone else. And this is a debate that will play out in every society post-pandemic. That said, I believe that this crisis might be a turning point for greater state involvement. People are being asked to make considerable sacrifices, and the only thing which keeps them going is the expectation that things will get better. The post-war society comes into mind, actually. Britain became a more egalitarian country as government became more interventionist back then, providing free healthcare, improving worker protections, and setting up a welfare state. Social media, of course, has a role in mediating this debate on state intervention, but recent experience has shown that it has contributed to increasing polarization. Social media algorithms often create bubbles or echo chambers where it is easier to get content that supports one's worldview instead of being open to other perspectives. Taken to an extreme, you get a situation where people don't agree on facts anymore. One good example being the recent US elections, where poll after poll suggests that a majority of US Republicans or conservatives believe in election fraud, while Democrats or liberals believe in the opposite. Of course, misinformation and hateful propaganda on social media also play a role. But the prerequisite of any rational debate is for people to be open to talk to one another, regardless of their political persuasion. People also need to agree on facts and assume good faith from the other side. Otherwise, we won't be able to agree on anything, much less a way forward. So, fact-checking information, or say, banning individuals who spread hate and misinformation, or increasing digital literacy can only touch the surface of the problem. We need society at large to come together. But one positive thing about crises is it often provides an opportunity to do just that. People coming together in pursuit of a bigger goal or the greater good. Leaders in government, business, and society have a crucial role in helping people come together, because ultimately, resilience in times of crisis demands leadership and social cohesion.
Thank you, Patrick. So today you've heard 5 members of the Future Vision Committee, and I think you will agree that they've presented a very wide range of ideas and topics. I'm sure some you'll agree with, and perhaps others you won't. That is exactly what the committee exists for, to debate and challenge ideas, not to agree with each other all the time. For me, it's a great honor to be able to chair a committee with so many talented and diverse resilience professionals aboard. But before we close today, I would like now to run through a few issues from the most recent reports. As I said in my introduction, we did include in our 2020 Trends report a survey of professionals' experience of dealing with COVID-19. This was a very interesting exercise to undertake and to analyze. I'm just going to share a few of the key figures, things that came out of that today, and I think you might find them also quite interesting. One simple question we asked people was, well, at what stage of the pandemic were you, and by you we meant you as an individual, as a resilience professional, or the resilience department within your organization, first involved? And I was quite pleased and quite a little bit surprised to see that the majority were involved right from the start, even at the point when the virus was being reported in China and we had no absolute certainty of what it was going to do to us in our own countries. Overall, 72% of all the respondents said that they were heavily involved with the corporate strategic planning for how they're going to deal with the issues. And 77% were responsible for significant parts of the operational response and implementation. I think these are very good numbers and very encouraging numbers. However, there was one slightly negative number that came out of that. 8.3% of all respondents said they actually had no involvement at all in the corporate response to COVID-19. I must admit, I wonder what the corporations that these individuals work for actually considered a professional in the resilience field did if they were not going to be involved in the largest challenge that their corporation has probably faced ever, or certainly since the Second World War. So that's an interesting point of why that 8.3 were not involved at all, which we may try to explore on another occasion. Less positive overall, however, was the question which we asked, which was at the beginning of the emergence of the virus, did your company have a pandemic plan in place? And I was expecting the vast majority to say yes, And that is true. The vast majority did say yes, but there was 26, just under 26% who actually said they had no pandemic plans at all. And though many said they had a pandemic plan, the vast majority of them said they only had a basic plan, pretty much modeled on previous flu epidemics. So they had no real idea how to deal with a crisis of this magnitude. It would be unrealistic to assume that anyone would have a plan exactly to meet the magnitude of COVID-19 that we would accept. But 6.6% said they had a very comprehensive pandemic plan, which they were able to adapt very quickly. So 6.6% were very happy with what they had done from a pre-planning perspective, but well over 90% either didn't have a plan or felt the plan was very basic and very limited. So this was a concerning result when we came to look at those results, bearing in mind that the people who were replying were, amongst them, all of them, resilience professionals, and most of them certified by DRI or highly qualified in some other way. So on that basis, that was a strange and slightly disappointing result. But then we asked the question about, well, how do you think, on reflection, bearing in mind that this was more or less at the end of what we might call the first wave, it would be interesting to go back and see how their views have changed as we've gone into waves 2 and 3. But at the end of the first wave, we said, well, how well do you think your organization overall handled the crisis? And the interesting thing was almost everyone did better than might have been expected, given their lack of plans. And in fact, only 4.5% felt their organization had performed badly. And this compares, if you remember back to the previous figures I gave you, with nearly 26% of the people who said they had no plans at all. So even those who had no pandemic plans at all still felt that they certainly hadn't performed badly. 46.7% felt they had performed very well. And yet only 6.6% felt they'd had a comprehensive plan. So there was actually no correlation at all, really, between what the level of your assessment of your pandemic plan was, in whether you had one or not, and your ability to get a good outcome in terms of how you performed as an organization. So this is a little bit concerning, but it did, on reflection, remind me very much of an old adage that's often quoted in our industry, attributed, to, I think, to former General and President Eisenhower, which went along the lines, in battle plans are often useless, but planning is indispensable. So that is, to me, has always been a key message of business continuity and resilience, is that we can't necessarily plan for every single thing that's going to happen. But the process we go by of understanding our organization, understanding what is important, understanding how we could respond, making sure that people are aware and people know what their roles are. All of these issues of a business continuity program are indispensable. So the planning is indispensable. Maybe you can't always plan exactly for what's going to happen. So I think that confirms, those results, I think, confirm probably very much what many of us have been thinking over many years. And then we turned our attention to, well, there's been a lot of changes. You've had to operate in different ways. Some of those are obvious, like people work from home. Some of them may be less obvious, like modifications to working methods. Other than, I mean, working methods, not just IT working methods or home working methods, but actual methods of manufacture, methods of distribution. So significant operational method changes. So we asked what people thought of the things that had been changed during COVID and how likely they are to be replicated on a permanent basis in the future. And the top 5 in terms of what was expected to change as part of a new normal and continue in the future. Well, the first one was, I think there's no surprise to anybody, was that people expected more voluntary, full and part-time home working would become the norm. And I think that was genuinely popular with most people and generally taken as a likely outcome of the consequences of what we've had to do during this pandemic. Second one, again, not necessarily so popular, but likely to happen, and that is business travel itself. Although will increase from what obviously has been happening in the last year, it's likely to be reduced from what it perhaps was in previous eras. So with more use of Zoom, more use of all of the various video conferencing facilities that are around, it is likely that perhaps business travel may struggle to get back to anywhere near its previous levels. Third one, which I was a little bit concerned about and not really expecting so much, was that many people felt that the full-time home working would become compulsory for many. There wouldn't be an office option. There wouldn't be a blended situation. There wouldn't be a go to the office where for certain requirements, but work on your basic stuff at home, which is actually what many of us have been doing for many years, of course, anyway. So this idea that the people will just not have offices, that the offices will shut down, that that people will not have a work location other than at home, without necessarily thinking through the full implications of that, which we haven't got time to discuss today, but are very complex. This was less popular with people, although some people were quite happy with it because they like working from home. Fourthly, there was thoughts about supply chain. People have had to change their supply chains because they may not have been able to get goods and services from the situations that they were in before. And so they've had to find different ways of getting supplies, different ways of getting services to them. And some of that has been seen as perhaps a result of too much globalization, too many single suppliers, not enough replication, not enough general resilience in the supply chain. So there's a feel that this is going to have to change, and that there will be significant changes to the way that organizations look at resilience in their supply chains. And then a nice one perhaps for our profession is most people felt that perhaps there'd be increased spending on all aspects of resilience as a result of this. Well, we will see, particularly about number 5, but it will be interesting for me to see whether some of the others come to fruition as well. I really hope that you enjoyed today's session. We really enjoyed planning it and preparing it and putting it together and presenting it for you. So let's hope that next year we'll all meet up again somewhere, someplace where we can actually have a beer, have a chat, and enjoy talking business continuity and resilience. So with that, I'd like to thank you again and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.